Kamala Harris was interviewed by Bret Baier on Fox News, and that alone is a funny sentence because some of you may not remember how demonized Fox News was when it first started. It was the end of the world that there should be one station that actually catered to conservatives. Somebody once said, Rupert Murdoch discovered a niche audience, which happened to be half of the country. And the idea that anyone should, just like Elon Musk now with X, the idea, oh my God, that anyone should disagree with this blob of leftist nonsense that has got ideas like anti-racism and men can become women and all these stupid ideas. It's because the ideas are stupid that anybody who says the emperor isn't wearing any clothes becomes the devil. So this is this demonized guy. Even the right sometimes demonizes Bret Baier. I watch Bret Baier several nights a week. The guy is definitely not only the best newsman on TV, he's the last newsman on TV. He's the last guy who plays it fair. He treats everybody exactly the same. People say he has Trump derangement syndrome because he'll interview him the same way he interviews Kamala Harris. So it's just funny that she now has to go there because, like I told you last week, she tried alternative media going up against the master of alternative media, made a total fool of herself. Now, a lot of people said that this interview was a disaster for her. I don't think it was, because her side can just say, well, she went up against the demon, Fox News, and she was, spunky and all this. And because she tried to filibuster, Baier was forced into the position where he had to keep cutting her off. I know what that's like. I've been in that position, and it made him look rude if you're in here on her side. However, the question is, in context, it was a disaster. In context, the fact that every word she said was untrue and her record was so bad and he brought her record up made the thing bad. And the reason it's out of context, and the reason I think that that's more important, like normally the fact that people lie and they obfuscate and they dodge questions doesn't make a politician look bad because they all do it. But she's doing it at a hyper level. And the thing is, people know it, but she doesn't know they know it. The reason she doesn't know they know it is she thinks she's still wrapped in that cocoon of media lies, but it's been taken away from her by the internet, and they just haven't caught up with this. So he starts out, he's talking about illegal immigration, and she won't tell him how many people have gotten in. It's millions and millions of people. He says 6 million, but I think it's way more than that. If you look at a chart, Obama was not so bad, Trump was not so bad, and then it just skyrockets under Biden and Harris. And the reason is the minute they came in, they got rid of all of Trump's safeguards because they hated Trump. And so the floodgates were open and all these guys came in. She keeps trying to blame Donald Trump, which is just laughable because they had this bill that was scuttled in Congress, and this codified catch and release. It let in close to 2 million illegals before it even went into effect. It funded sanctuary cities. It funded NGOs who support illegals, gave lawyers. It was just a crap bill that they said was a big deal. Then Baier moved on to the subject of crime. And this is a long clip, but it's worth listening to this little dance they did on the fact that many of these people who've come in, hundreds of them, are now suspected terrorists, and several of them have been murdered people in America. And this is the exchange they had.
When you came into office, your administration immediately reversed a number of Trump border policies. Most significantly, the policy that required illegal immigrants to be detained through deportation, either in the U.S. or in Mexico. And you switched that policy. They were released from custody awaiting trial. So instead, included in those were a large number of single men, adult men, who went on to commit heinous crimes. So, looking back, do you regret the decision to terminate Remain in Mexico at the beginning of your administration?
At the beginning of our administration, within practically hours of taking the oath, the first bill that we offered Congress, before we worked on infrastructure, before the Inflation Reduction Act, before the Chips and Science Act, before the bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the first bill, practically within hours of taking the oath, was a bill to fix our immigration system.
Yes, ma'am. It was called the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021.
Exactly.
It was essentially a pathway to citizenship for the...
Yes, ma'am. May I finish responding, please? But you have to let me finish,
You
please.
had the White House and the House and the Senate.
They didn't bring up the bill because it was basically letting all of these illegals become citizens, giving them a pathway to citizenship, they call it. We've done that before. They did it under Reagan. It was a disaster for people who think that immigration should be controlled. Now, the thing about this is, though, it happens, they're talking across each other, and you can read it any way you want. If you're for Harris, you can read it as Baier being unkind. Or if you're against her, you can read it as a disaster. But I think the people who are thinking people, who are paying attention, are getting their information from so many sources, and it all takes place in the context of what has been happening, what Democrats have supported. For instance, just talking about comedy for a minute, talking about things that are funny. They tear down statues to George Washington and build statues to George Floyd, a drug addict who scarfed his drugs because he was caught by the police and probably died from a drug overdose. And then they thought, oh my gosh, he's changed the world. And they're still insanely hysterical about this anomalous event that meant nothing. Matt Walsh in his film goes out and petitions people to change the Washington Monument, change it to the George Floyd Monument. People sign the petition. I'm sorry, but that's funny. It is funny. It's insane, but it's funny. I mean, it's terrible that they're inviting blacks to be criminals. They're basically saying this guy represents blacks because he's a drug addict and a criminal, and police mistreated him, which of course, is just a completely false narrative. And that's sad. It's sad that black people are going to suffer and be branded as this guy, this kind of person, instead of the kind of people who achieve things and move up in the world. That's sad because human suffering is always sad. But the idea is kind of funny. I mean, over at CBS, remember we talked about that thing, Tony DeCouple caught Ta-Nehisi Coates being an absolute ignorant, anti-Semitic radical when it came to what's going on in Palestine, and they scolded. CBS had this thing with the Stalinist name, like the Race and Culture Department, where they scolded DeCouple. Well, now, apparently, insiders are saying DeCouple has been making an apology tour of CBS and sort of, saying, boo-hoo, I was mean to Ta-Nehisi Coates. And I'm sorry, that's treating, the left does this to black people. It's treating him like child. They did this to Obama too. You asked him a hard question. He's just a little person, a little black person. He can't do it. That's essentially what they're doing to Ta-Nehisi Coates, and it just makes him look ridiculous. I'm sorry. And the fact that DeCouple is going along with it, that's sad. I'm sorry he sold his soul and got cowed by these people. But, come on. This is the country that we're living in, where a reporter asks a tough question of a guy who's essentially backing murdering terrorists, and somebody asks him a tough question, and they're busy giving him genius grants and throwing money at him. If this guy's such a radical, how come the establishment is pouring money on his head? Has he ever? I wonder if he even asks himself that. Does he wake up to Ta-Nehisi Coates, wake up at night and think like, oh my, maybe I'm not a radical. Maybe I'm actually doing something good for the white man by making blacks look like a bunch of radicals and a bunch of criminals. But, that probably never occurs to them because the money is so good. So Kamala Harris doesn't apologize for the fact that her policies got young people slaughtered, mean hundreds of people who may be terrorists have now escaped into this country, and 3 years down the road, somebody may blow something up, and if Trump is president, it'll be Donald Trump's fault. I'm sorry, except for the human suffering, because human suffering is not funny, but except for the human suffering, we're living in a comedy. We are. I mean, we're living in a comedy of stupidity, of mass stupidity. And the funny thing is that Kamala Harris thinks that, for instance, in terms of the crime that has come in from Democrat things like defund the police and by, the immigration thing, she thinks she's protected by the media. You remember when David Muir fact-checked Donald Trump during the debate? Here's just a small cut. We've played this once before, but it's worth hearing again. Cut 10 from the debate.
Crime is down all over the world except here. Crime here is up and through the roof. Despite their fraudulent statements that they made, crime in this country is through the roof. And we have a new form of crime. It's called migrant crime. And it's happening at levels that nobody thought possible.
President Trump, as you know, the FBI says overall violent crime is actually coming down in this country. But
Excuse me, the FBI they were defrauding statements. They didn't include the worst cities.
So this is why Kamala Harris thinks she's protected, because listen to what the media did with that information. Cut 11.
The president repeats the claim that crime is rising. The facts say it is not.
FBI statistics released today show that crime is dropping. Mr. Trump remains fixated on crime, even imaginary crimes.
We have done the work. We have seen violent crimes go down because of the work that this president and this vice president has done.
Joe Biden inherited a rising high crime country. When Joe Biden passes the baton to Kamala Harris, it's a declining lower crime country.
Crime is going down.
Which the FBI just updated the numbers to.
Violent crime rate is at a 50-year low. We're also securing our border.
We see violent crime coming down in this country because of Kamala Harris's leadership.
A huge drop in crime this year. And so the record on crime overall between these two guys, again, isn't.
Make people think that crime is up when crime is down under Joe Biden.
See, there was a time in this country that when I was alive, there was a time when that would be the information that you got. But over on Fox News, on that little, cable part of Fox News that they do, the little, online thing that Fox News Digital, it's called. I have a friend named Jeff Anderson. He runs a small think tank called the American Main Street Initiative. And Jeff is just an expert statistician. And he went on Fox, and this is what while they're saying this, while that's happening, this is what Jeff Anderson of the American Main Street Initiative was saying. Cut 12.
There's been a huge increase in urban crime from 2019, right before the summer of George Floyd and the defund the police movement, to 2023, which are the most recent numbers, which were just released a couple of weeks ago. In fact, the increase in urban crime, violent crime, is 40% over that period of time. And if you take out simple assaults, which are the sort of least serious form of violent crime, then it's 54% is the increase. So it's a huge crime spike in our cities.
So this week, quietly, without any press releases, without any announcements, the FBI very quietly adjusted their crime figures for 2022 to show that offenses actually ticked up, right? A little stealth edit, except that real clear investigations caught it, because that's where the information is coming from now. It's coming from online sources, independent sources, just the sort of sources that what they're called misinformation, which translates to the truth that they don't want you to hear. So in fact, Donald Trump was right. Jeff Anderson was right. We were right. They were wrong. All of those people were wrong. ABC, NBC, CBS, all wrong. New York Times, all wrong. We were right. And they think that means the people don't know. But I don't think they're right about this, or at least they're not as right as they used to be and not as right as they think they are. And they're reduced. What are they reduced to saying? Martha Raddatz. This is amazing. Martha Raddatz on ABC has Vance on and scolds Vance, J.D. Vance, because Donald Trump talked about Aurora, Colorado, where this horrendous South American crime ring has come in and taken over buildings. And she said, well, it's not happening all over. This is what she says. Listen to this.
The incidents were limited to a handful of apartment complexes, and the mayor said our dedicated police officers have acted on those concerns. A handful of problems.
Only, Martha, do you hear yourself? Only a handful of apartment complexes in America were taken over by Venezuelan gangs, and Donald Trump is the problem and not Kamala Harris's open border? Americans are so fed up with what's going on, and they have every right to be. And I really find this exchange, Martha, sort of interesting, because you seem to be more focused with nitpicking everything that Donald Trump has said, rather than acknowledging that apartment complexes in the United States of America are being taken over by violent gangs.
Now, that's just funny in and of itself, because one would like to ask Martha Raddatz how many apartment buildings can be taken over by Venezuelan gangs before she gets upset about it. But it's doubly funny because it's reporters. What is a reporter's job? A reporter's job is to fact check the government by talking to the people. What is she doing? She's fact checking the people by talking to the government. Well, the mayor says everything's fine. The mayor says, remember, they did the exact same thing to Donald Trump. They did the exact same thing to Donald Trump when he talked about eating cats, and they fact checked him again. And they said, well, the city manager says that, everything's fine. There's no cats being eaten. He says, I saw people on TV saying their cats were eaten, and everybody laughed at Donald Trump. But obviously, those people know something. I mean, you're a reporter. You're supposed to go out and get the people on the scene and then go to the mayor and say, or the city manager and say, hey, wait a minute. You told us this, Mr. Government, Mr. Guy in power. And the people are saying that you're wrong. So we have a process. I'm sorry, it is. It's funny. It's like you call the government to fact check the people, and then you say we're speaking truth to power, or maybe the other way around, one or the other. I know we were supposed to do one of those things, but I can't remember. And again, it's sad because human suffering saps the humor out of it. But when you step back and look at it, it's funny because we see them doing it now. They used to do it in secret. They used to get away with it. Not anymore. God, that guy is great, isn't he? Like and subscribe. And if you want even more of them, subscribe to The Andrew Klavan Show, wherever you get your podcasts.